The blood trail stretched 20 yards behind him, crimson drops painting the dust like a hellish breadcrumb path. And Natalie Durant saw it first through her cabin window, as the morning light broke over the scrubland of Sweetwater, Texas, in the spring of 1877. Her breath caught when she spotted the man crawling toward her door, his shirt torn and soaked through with blood, one arm dragging uselessly at his side while the other clawed desperately at the hard-packed earth. She dropped the breakfast pan she had been scrubbing and ran outside, her boots kicking up dust as she hurried down the 2 wooden steps of her porch. The man collapsed just as she reached him, his face pressing into the dirt inches from her doorstep. "Mister, can you hear me?" Natalie knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his torn shirt, unsure where to touch without causing more damage. His breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps that sent ice through her veins. She had seen death before, had watched it take her father 2 years past, and this man wore its shadow like a shroud. When he did not respond, she made her decision quickly. At 23 years old and living alone on the outskirts of town, Natalie had learned to act fast or not at all. She grabbed him under his good arm and began dragging him toward the door, her muscles straining against his weight. He was a big man, easily over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and harder living. His dark hair was matted with sweat and dirt, his face so covered in grime she could barely make out his features. The process of getting him inside took every ounce of strength she possessed. She pulled him across the threshold, his boots scraping against the wooden floorboards as she maneuvered him toward the old quilt she kept folded near the fireplace. Once she had him on his back, she could finally assess the damage. 3 bullet wounds. One in his shoulder, one that had grazed his ribs, and another in his thigh. The shoulder wound was the worst, still bleeding freely and painting her hands red as she pressed them against it. His shirt was ruined, so she grabbed her sewing scissors and cut it away, revealing a muscular chest marked with old scars that told stories of a violent life. "You are not dying in my cabin," she said aloud, as if speaking the words could make them true. "Do you hear me? You are not dying here." She worked quickly, building up the fire and setting water to boil. Her father had been a doctor before they moved to Texas, and though she had never formally studied medicine, she had watched him work countless times. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she gathered clean cloths, whiskey for cleaning the wounds, and her father's old medical kit that she kept in a trunk by her bed. The man stirred when she poured whiskey over the shoulder wound, a groan escaping his lips that told her he was still clinging to consciousness somewhere in the depths of his pain-addled mind. She worked to extract the bullet from his shoulder, her fingers steady despite the gore, her jaw set with determination. The bullet came free after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, and she dropped it into a tin cup where it clinked against the metal with finality. "One down," she whispered, moving to examine the thigh wound. This bullet had gone clean through, which made her job easier. She cleaned both entry and exit wounds, then bound them tightly with strips of cloth she tore from an old bedsheet. The rib wound was superficial, painful but not deadly, and she cleaned and bandaged it quickly. By the time she finished, the sun was high in the sky and her hands were stained dark with blood. The man's breathing had evened out slightly, though his face was pale as milk and covered in a sheen of sweat. Fever would come next, she knew, and that battle might prove harder than the bullets themselves. Natalie stood and walked to her water basin, scrubbing her hands clean before allowing herself a moment to think about what she had just done. She had dragged a stranger into her home, a man who had clearly been shot for a reason. Was he an outlaw? A murderer? The sensible part of her brain said she should fetch the sheriff. Let the law handle whatever trouble this man had brought to her doorstep. But she looked at him lying there, unconscious and vulnerable, and she could not bring herself to do it. Whatever he had done, whoever had shot him, he was a human being who needed help. She would fight for his life first and ask questions later. The first day passed in a blur of changing bandages and forcing water between his cracked lips. He burned with fever, his body fighting the infection that threatened to claim him despite her best efforts. She bathed his face and chest with cool cloths, trying to bring down the temperature that made his skin feel like a furnace. He thrashed sometimes, calling out names she did not recognize, fighting invisible demons that only he could see. "Martha, get down," he shouted once, his good arm swinging wildly. Natalie caught his wrist, holding it gently until the fit passed. "You are safe," she told him, though he could not hear. "You are safe now." Night fell and she dozed in her rocking chair, unwilling to leave him alone for long. Every few hours she would wake and check his bandages, administer more water, adjust the blanket she had laid over him. Her back ached and her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she refused to rest properly until she knew he would survive. The second day brought new challenges. His fever spiked higher, and she knew she was losing the battle against infection. The shoulder wound showed signs of festering despite her careful cleaning, and she knew she had to act. She heated her father's scalpel in the fire until it glowed red, then reopened the wound to drain the infection. The man screamed, a sound that tore at her heart, but she held firm and did what needed to be done. "I am sorry," she whispered as she worked, tears streaming down her face. "I am so sorry, but this has to happen." She packed the wound with poultices made from herbs her father had taught her to use, plants she gathered from the scrubland that had properties to fight infection and promote healing. Yarrow to stop bleeding, plantain to draw out poison, honey to keep the wound clean. Old knowledge passed down through generations, now put to desperate use. On the third day, the fever finally broke. She woke in her chair to find him looking at her with clear eyes the color of storm clouds, confusion written across his face. "Where am I?" His voice was rough as gravel, barely more than a whisper. Natalie sat up straight, her heart leaping with relief. "My cabin, about 3 miles outside Sweetwater. You crawled to my door 3 days ago, shot to pieces. Do you remember anything?" He tried to move and grimaced, the pain clearly evident in the lines that appeared around his eyes. "Some ambush on the road, 4 men, I got away but not clean." His eyes focused on her more intently. "You saved my life. I did what anyone would do." "No," he said firmly, despite his weakness. "Most folks would have let me die or fetched the sheriff. You did not. Why?" Natalie stood and walked to the stove, ladling some broth into a cup to avoid his penetrating gaze. "Because you needed help. That is reason enough." She returned to his side and knelt down. "Can you sit up enough to drink this? You need food in you." With her help, he managed to prop himself against the wall, his face going white with the effort. She held the cup to his lips and he drank slowly, the warm broth seeming to bring some life back into his features. In the better light, with the dirt and blood cleaned away, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 27 or 28. Handsome, too, in a rough-hewn way, with a strong jaw and a straight nose that had been broken at least once. "I am Natalie Durant," she said when he finished the broth. "And you are Benjamin Kane. Most people call me Ben." He looked down at his bandaged body. "You did all this yourself. My father was a doctor. He taught me some before he passed. Then I owe you more than my life. I owe you a debt I do not know how to repay." His eyes met hers again, and she saw something in them that made her pulse quicken. Gratitude, yes, but something else too, something she was afraid to name. "Get better," she said, standing quickly. That is payment enough. Over the next week, Ben grew stronger each day. She helped him sit up for longer periods, fed him broth that gradually thickened to stew, changed his bandages, and watched with satisfaction as the wounds began to heal cleanly. He slept most of the time, his body using every resource to repair itself. But when he was awake, they talked. She learned he was a ranch hand from Wyoming, come down to Texas looking for work after a harsh winter had killed half the cattle and put most of the hands out of a job. He had been hired by a ranch east of Sweetwater, was traveling there to start work when the ambush happened. They wanted my horse and what little money I had, he explained, anger darkening his features. I recognized one of them. Outlaw named Cole Johnson, rides with a gang out of the Badlands. I fought back, which was probably stupid, but I was not about to hand over everything I owned without a fight. You got away from 4 armed men. That does not sound stupid to me. I got lucky. Shot one of them and the others scattered long enough for me to ride off. But they hit me 3 times before I got clear. My horse threw me about a mile from here and ran off. I crawled the rest. Natalie tried to imagine the strength it must have taken to crawl a mile with 3 bullet wounds, bleeding and in agony, refusing to give up. You must have wanted to live very badly. I did not want to die in the dirt like an animal, he said quietly. My pa died that way, shot down by claim jumpers in Nevada. I swore I would go out on my terms, not theirs. He looked at her. Then I saw your cabin and I knew if I could just reach it, just get to that door, maybe I had a chance. I did not know an angel lived inside. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. I am no angel, Ben Kane, just a woman who knows how to stitch wounds. You are more than that and you know it. The way he said it, with such quiet certainty, made something flutter in her chest. She turned away, busying herself with straightening blankets that did not need straightening, trying to ignore the feeling that was growing stronger each day she spent in his company. By the 10th day, Ben was able to stand with help, leaning heavily on her as he took a few shaky steps around the cabin. His strength was returning faster than she had dared hope, his natural constitution proving stronger than the bullets that had tried to claim him. She found herself noticing things about him she should not. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. The sound of his laugh when she said something that amused him. The careful way he tried not to lean too hard on her, even though she could tell each step cost him dearly. "Tell me about you," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, him on the quilt and her in her chair. "A woman living alone out here, that cannot be easy." Natalie stirred the stew she was making for supper, considering how much to reveal. "My father and I came here 5 years ago from Missouri. He wanted to open a practice, help the folks in town. We bought this land cheap, built this cabin. He was going to build a proper house once he got established." She paused, old grief tightening her throat, but the consumption took him 2 years back. "By the time I realized how bad it was, there was nothing to be done. And you stayed here alone. Where else would I go? This is my home. I sell eggs in town, do some sewing work, make medicines from the plants I gather. It is not much, but it is mine." She looked at him. "People think I should remarry, that a woman has no business living alone. But I was engaged once, before we came to Texas. He loved my father's money more than he loved me. When we lost everything in a bad investment and decided to move west, he disappeared faster than snow in July. That taught me something about relying on men for security." Ben was quiet for a long moment. He was a fool. Maybe, or maybe he was honest about what he wanted. Either way, I decided I would rather live alone and independent than married and miserable. I can respect that. He shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position. "Though I have to say, independence is easier when you are not shot full of holes. You would have been well within your rights to turn me away." "The thought never crossed my mind," she admitted. "I saw you crawling toward my door, and all I could think was that I had to help. Nothing else mattered." Their eyes met across the fire, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken things. Natalie looked away first, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was dangerous. She could not afford to feel things for Ben Kane, a man who would leave as soon as he was well enough to ride. Getting attached would only lead to heartbreak, and she had worked too hard to build her life here to risk it on feelings that would fade the moment he disappeared down the road. But knowing she should not feel something and actually stopping herself were two different things entirely. 3 weeks after Ben first crawled to her door, he was able to walk outside unaided. Natalie watched from the porch as he took slow, careful steps around the yard, testing his strength. The shoulder still pained him. She could tell from the way he favored it, but the wounds had healed cleanly and his color had returned to normal. Soon he would be well enough to leave. The thought filled her with an emptiness she did not want to examine too closely. "You have a good piece of land here," Ben said, returning to the porch. He sat down on the steps beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the cool morning air. "Good water, decent grazing. You ever think about raising more than chickens?" "I have thought about it. But running cattle or horses takes more than one person can manage." "It does," he agreed. He was quiet for a moment, and she could feel him building up to something. "Natalie, I need to tell you something." Her stomach dropped. Here it came, the goodbye she had been dreading. "What is it?" "That job I was heading to when I got shot. I sent them a letter last week explaining what happened. Got a reply yesterday when I walked into town. They filled the position already." He turned to look at her. "I do not have anywhere I need to be." She blinked, not sure she understood. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I would like to stay if you will have me. Not in the cabin," he added quickly. "I could build a room addition or a bunkhouse, keep everything proper, but this land, it has potential. We could build something here, together." "Ben, you cannot just upend your life for me." "Why not? I have no ties anywhere else. My ma died when I was young, my pa is gone, no siblings. I have been drifting from job to job for 5 years, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home." He reached out and gently took her hand, his rough fingers wrapping around hers. "But here, with you, I feel like maybe I found something worth staying for." Natalie's breath caught. She wanted to say yes so badly it hurt, but fear held her back. "What if you change your mind? What if you get restless and decide to move on? I cannot go through that again, Ben. I cannot give my heart to someone who is going to leave. I will not lie and say I know for certain what the future holds, but I know what I feel right now, and that is something I have never felt before." He squeezed her hand gently. "You saved my life, Natalie. You fought for me when you had no reason to. That means something. You mean something. Give me a chance to prove I am not like that fool who left you. Give me a chance to show you what kind of man I can be." She looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw nothing but honesty there. Maybe she was being foolish. Maybe this would end badly. But maybe, just maybe, it would not. And if there was even a chance at something real, something lasting, was not that worth the risk? "Stay," she whispered. "Help me build something here. But Ben, if you ever decide to leave, promise you will tell me straight. Do not just disappear." "I promise." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I am not going anywhere." The next few months transformed both the land and the relationship between them. Ben built a small bunkhouse behind the cabin where he slept, keeping things respectable while he worked from sunup to sundown improving the property. He repaired the chicken coop and expanded it, built a proper barn, and fenced in a pasture. Natalie marveled at his energy, at the way he threw himself into the work as if he was building not just structures but a future. They fell into an easy rhythm. She would make breakfast and he would eat quickly before heading out to work. She tended her garden and made her medicines while he labored in the heat, his shirt often discarded by midday as sweat gleamed on his tanned skin. She tried not to stare but found herself looking out the window more often than necessary, watching the play of muscles across his back, the easy confidence of his movements now that he had healed completely. In the evenings they would sit on the porch together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in mining camps, following his father from Nevada to Montana to Wyoming, never staying anywhere long enough to make friends. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about the books she loved to read, and the dreams she had of maybe expanding her medicine work into a real practice. "You could do it," Ben said one evening as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. "People in town already come to you when they are sick. You could make it official, carry on your father's legacy. It would take money we do not have, supplies, equipment, a space in town. Then we will save for it, build up the herd I am planning to start, sell the calves, put the money aside." He looked at her with such faith it made her chest tight. "We will make it happen, Natalie, together." That word, together. It had become part of their daily vocabulary, a promise and a plan wrapped into one. They were partners now, working toward shared goals, and somewhere along the way her heart had made the decision her mind was still cautious about. She loved him. She loved Benjamin Kane with an intensity that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She thought maybe he loved her too, could see it in the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, in the gentle way he touched her hand when passing her something, in the way he always made sure she ate enough and rested when she pushed herself too hard. But he had not said the words, and neither had she, as if speaking them aloud would make everything too real, too fragile. Summer blazed into autumn, and Ben bought 6 head of cattle from a rancher in town who was selling off part of his herd. It was not much, but it was a start. They watched the cattle graze in the pasture, and Natalie felt something swell in her chest that felt dangerously like hope. One evening in October, Ben did not come in for supper at the usual time. Natalie waited, growing concerned as the light faded and he still had not appeared. She walked out to the barn and found him inside, sitting on a bale of hay, his head in his hands. "Ben, what is wrong?" He looked up and she saw something in his face that made her heart clench. "I saw Cole Johnson in town today." The name sent ice through her veins, the outlaw who had shot him. "What happened? Did he see you?" "No. He was coming out of the saloon and I ducked into the general store before he spotted me. But he is here, Natalie. In Sweetwater. That means his gang is probably here too." She sat down beside him, her mind racing. "Should we tell the sheriff?" "I already did." He said unless Johnson or his men commit a crime in his jurisdiction, there is nothing he can do. They are wanted in New Mexico, but not here. Ben's hands clenched into fists. "I do not care about myself. But you, Natalie. If they find out where I am, if they come here looking for revenge, you could get hurt. I will not risk that." Understanding dawned cold and terrible. "You are thinking about leaving. I am thinking about keeping you safe." "No." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "No, Ben Kane, you do not get to make that decision for me. You promised you would not leave. You promised. That was before I knew I might be bringing danger to your door. I knew you were in danger the moment I saw you crawling up to my cabin covered in blood," she said fiercely. "I knew, and I helped you anyway, because that is what you do for people you care about. You do not abandon them the moment things get hard." "Natalie, I love you," she said, the words bursting out of her like water from a broken dam. "I love you, Ben, and if you leave now to keep me safe, it will break my heart just as surely as if those outlaws shot it to pieces. So you do not get to leave. We face this together, do you understand? Together. For a long moment he just stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. Then he pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her as he buried his face in her hair. I love you too, he whispered against her ear. God help me, Natalie. I love you so much it scares me. I have never had anything worth losing before, and now I have everything. You are everything. She pulled back just enough to cup his face in her hands. Then trust me, trust us. We will figure this out. He kissed her then, a kiss full of desperation and promise, and she kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. We should get married, he said. Soon. I know we have been doing things proper, but I want you to be my wife, Natalie. I want it legal and binding and real. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you, Ben Kane. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Sweetwater, with the minister's wife and the general store owner as witnesses. Natalie wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, and Ben wore his only good shirt, his hair slicked back and his face nervous as they stood before the minister. When he slipped the thin gold band on her finger, his hands were shaking, and when she said "I do," she saw his eyes shine with unshed tears. The kiss that sealed their vows was sweet and chaste, appropriate for the church setting, but the promise in it made her knees weak. They rode back to the cabin in the wagon, Ben's arm around her shoulders, both of them grinning like fools. They had discussed selling the bunkhouse wood for scrap since Ben would be moving into the cabin proper, but Ben thought they could convert it to a storage building instead. Everything seemed possible. The whole world spread before them bright with potential. That night, as they lay together in the bed that had been hers and was now theirs, Ben traced patterns on her shoulder with gentle fingers. I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this was all a dream, he said quietly. That I am still bleeding out in the dirt and this is just my brain making my death easier. You are not dreaming. She turned to face him, pressing her palm over his heart where she could feel the steady beat. You are alive, you are here, and you are mine. Yours, he agreed, covering her hand with his. Always yours. The next few months were the happiest of Natalie's life. She woke each morning to Ben beside her, fell asleep each night in his arms, and spent her days working alongside him to build their future. They had good luck with the cattle, and by spring, they were able to buy 6 more head. The chickens laid well, and Natalie's medicine business grew as word spread about her skill. But the shadow of Cole Johnson and his gang hung over them like a storm cloud waiting to break. They saw signs of the outlaws in town occasionally, heard stories of robberies and violence in the surrounding area, and each time Natalie saw worry darken Ben's features. They will move on eventually, she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Outlaws never stay in one place long. Maybe. But he did not sound convinced. The storm finally broke on a hot day in June. Natalie was in the garden, pulling weeds when she heard horses approaching. 3 riders came into view, and her blood turned to ice when she recognized the man in front from Ben's description. Cole Johnson, a tall man with a cruel face and hard eyes, a gun belt slung low on his hips. "Afternoon, madam," Johnson said, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "We are looking for a man. Big fellow, dark hair, probably still limping from some bullet wounds. You seen anyone like that around here?" Natalie forced her face to remain calm even though her heart was hammering. "I have not seen anyone like that. This is my land and I would appreciate it if you would leave." "Your land, huh?" Johnson looked around with obvious skepticism. "A woman alone keeping up a spread like this, that does not seem likely. My husband is in town buying supplies. He will be back soon." Is that so? Johnson's eyes narrowed. And what is your husband's name, madam? Before she could answer, Ben's voice rang out from behind the barn. Her husband's name is Benjamin Kane, and you are on his property without permission. Natalie's stomach dropped as Ben walked into view, a rifle held loosely in his hands, but pointed in the general direction of the three riders. His face was set in hard lines, all the gentleness she knew stripped away to reveal the man who had fought off 4 armed attackers and crawled a mile to survive. Well, well, Johnson said, his hand drifting toward his gun. The man who shot Tanner finally turns up. We have been looking for you, Kane. And now you found me. So let us settle this. You boys ride off my land and we call it even. I will not pursue revenge for you trying to kill me, and you let go of your grudge about your man. Everyone goes their separate way. I do not think so. Johnson's voice went cold. Tanner died from that wound you gave him. That makes you a murderer, and I do not let murderers walk away. I was defending myself against thieves. The law would call it justified. The law is not here. Johnson's hand moved fast, drawing his gun, but Ben was faster. The rifle barked once and Johnson's hat flew off, the bullet passing so close to his head he reared back in his saddle. The next one goes through your skull, Ben said flatly. Now get off my land. The 2 men behind Johnson had their hands on their guns but had not drawn, clearly not eager to face Ben's rifle. Johnson's face twisted with rage, but he was smart enough to recognize he was outgunned. He jerked his reins hard, wheeling his horse around. This is not over, Kane, he snarled. Not by a long shot. They rode off in a cloud of dust, and Natalie ran to Ben, her legs shaking so badly she almost fell. He caught her with his free arm, holding her tight. It is okay, he said, but she could feel the tension in his body. They are gone, for now, but they will come back, Ben. You know they will. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, I know, which is why we need to end this. What do you mean? I mean I am going to the sheriff, getting a proper statement on record about what happened. Johnson admitted his man died. If the law knows they are wanted for murder and attempted murder, they will have to run or face hanging. He cupped her face gently. I will not spend the rest of our lives looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to attack. We are going to settle this the right way. They rode into Sweetwater together the next morning, and Ben gave a full statement to Sheriff Hawkins about the ambush, Johnson's threats, and everything that had happened. The sheriff, a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness, listened carefully. I will send telegrams to the territorial marshal, Hawkins said when Ben finished. With your statement and the wanted posters from New Mexico, we should be able to get authorization to arrest Johnson and his men. But Kane, you need to understand, this could get ugly. Johnson will not go quietly. I understand, but I have a wife now, Sheriff, a life worth protecting. I cannot let them keep threatening that. Hawkins nodded slowly. All right, give me a few days to hear back from the marshal. In the meantime, keep your head down and your rifle close. They left the sheriff's office and were walking toward the general store when Natalie heard her name called. She turned to see Mrs. Patterson, an older woman from town, hurrying toward them. Mrs. Kane, thank goodness, the woman said breathlessly. It is my grandson. He has a terrible fever and cannot keep anything down. My daughter is beside herself with worry. Could you come look at him? Natalie glanced at Ben, who nodded. Go. I will get the supplies and meet you at the Patterson house. The boy was indeed very sick, his small body burning with fever and his breathing labored. Natalie examined him carefully, asked questions about when the symptoms started and what he had eaten recently, and finally determined he had a severe case of stomach fever. She mixed a tincture from the supplies she always carried. showed the mother how to administer it and keep the boy hydrated, and promised to return the next day to check on him. When she emerged from the house 2 hours later, she found Ben waiting in the wagon, his face tight with concern that eased when he saw her. "How is the boy?" "Very sick, but he should recover with proper care." She climbed up beside him. "You waited all this time." "Of course I did. I am not leaving you alone in town with Johnson and his gang around." He flicked the reins and the horses started forward. "Besides, it gave me time to think." "About what?" "About how good you are at this, how many people you help." He glanced at her. "The store owner said 3 different people came looking for you while I was getting supplies. You are practically the town doctor already, Natalie. We should make it official." "Ben, we have talked about this. The money will come. The cattle are doing well. I got a good price for those eggs you sent with me, and the store owner said he would pay regular for your tinctures and remedies. We are making progress." He reached over and took her hand. "I want you to have your dream, Natalie. Your father would have wanted that too." She squeezed his fingers, overwhelmed by his faith in her. "Maybe next year, once we are sure we are stable." "Next year," he agreed. But next year seemed very far away 3 nights later when Natalie woke to the smell of smoke. She sat up fast, her heart pounding, and shook Ben awake. "Fire!" They stumbled out of bed and ran outside to find the barn engulfed in flames, the dry wood burning like tinder in the summer heat. Ben cursed and ran for the barn doors, yanking them open to let the panicked cattle out. They stampeded into the night, terrified by the flames, while Ben and Natalie worked frantically to save what they could. It was hopeless. The fire had too much of a head start, and within an hour the barn was nothing but smoking ruins and scattered embers. They stood in the ashes as dawn broke, covered in soot and ash, surveying the destruction of months of hard work. "Johnson," Ben said, his voice rough with smoke and fury. "This was Johnson. You do not know that. Who else would it be?" He turned to her, and she saw rage burning in his eyes hotter than any fire. "He could not face me straight, so he attacked while we slept, tried to burn us out." "But we are okay," Natalie said, gripping his arm. "We are alive, Ben. The cabin is fine. We can rebuild." "No." His jaw set in a hard line. "This ends now. Today." "Ben, what are you?" But he was already striding toward the cabin. She followed and found him loading his rifle with grim efficiency, checking his revolver, strapping on his gun belt. She recognized this version of Ben, the dangerous man he had been before he crawled to her door, and it frightened her. "You are not going after them alone," she said. "That is suicide. I am going to the sheriff. Hawkins needs to see this, needs to understand Johnson will not stop." He turned to her, and some of the hardness left his face. "I am not being reckless, Natalie, but I am not going to wait for him to come back and maybe hurt you next time." She wanted to argue to make him stay, but she knew that look, so instead she said, "Then I am coming with you." "Natalie, together, remember? That is what we promised each other." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Together." They rode into Sweetwater as the sun climbed higher, the wagon rattling over the rough road. Natalie kept glancing at Ben, worried by the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand kept drifting to his gun. She had seen him gentle and loving, had seen him work until his hands bled to build their home, but now she was seeing another side, one forged in violence and survival. The sheriff's office was near the center of town, a small building with iron bars on the windows. They tied up the wagon and Ben pushed through the door, Natalie right behind him. "Sheriff, we need to talk," Ben started, then stopped short. Cole Johnson stood by the sheriff's desk, looking entirely too comfortable. Sheriff Hawkins sat behind the desk, his face carefully neutral. "Kane," Johnson said with a cold smile. "Just the man I wanted to see. I was just telling the sheriff here about the fire at my camp last night. Someone tried to burn us out, killed one of my horses. That is a lie, Ben said flatly. You burned our barn last night, Johnson. We have the ashes to prove it. Do you have proof I did it? Johnson's smile widened. Because I have 2 witnesses who say I was playing cards in the saloon until past midnight. Can you say where you were? The trap became suddenly, horribly clear. Johnson had established an alibi while someone else set the fire, and now he was trying to turn the tables, make it look like Ben was the aggressor. Natalie felt sick. Sheriff, you cannot believe this, she said urgently. Our barn burned to the ground last night. All our supplies, months of work gone. Why would we burn Johnson's camp? I am not saying I believe anything yet, Hawkins said carefully. But Mrs. Kane, without witnesses or evidence, it is your word against his. What about the ambush? Ben demanded. What about Johnson threatening us on our own land? What ambush? Johnson said innocently. I do not know what you are talking about, Kane. Maybe you hit your head when you fell off your horse. Ben's hand moved toward his gun and Natalie grabbed his wrist, holding tight. Do not, she whispered urgently. That is what he wants. You draw on him in front of the sheriff and he wins. She saw Ben struggle with it, saw the war between rage and reason play out across his face. Finally, his hand moved away from his gun, though his whole body remained tense as a coiled spring. Sheriff, please, Natalie said. You know us. We are honest people trying to make a living. This man is an outlaw wanted in New Mexico. Who are you going to believe? Hawkins sighed heavily. I hear back from the territorial marshal today. Until then, I suggest you both go home and stay there. Johnson, the same goes for you. I do not want any trouble in my town. It was not the answer Natalie wanted, but it was something. They left the office, Johnson's mocking laughter following them out. Ben did not speak until they were back in the wagon, his hands gripping the reins so tight his knuckles were white. He is going to get away with it, Ben said quietly. The law will not touch him. You do not know that. The sheriff said he was hearing from the marshal today. And what if the marshal says there is not enough evidence? What if Johnson and his men just keep coming after us, burning and threatening and hurting, and we have to sit back and take it because we are trying to do things the right way? He turned to look at her, anguish in his eyes. I cannot lose you, Natalie, I cannot. If it comes down to following the law or keeping you safe, I choose you, every time. I know. She took his hand, held it tight. But it has not come to that yet. We have to trust the system will work. They drove home in tense silence, both of them jumping at shadows, watching for any sign of Johnson or his men. When they reached the cabin, Ben insisted on checking every building, every corner of the property, before he would let Natalie go inside. Only when he was satisfied they were alone did he finally relax slightly. That evening they received unexpected visitors. Sheriff Hawkins arrived with 2 other men, one wearing a territorial marshal's badge and the other dressed in a suit that marked him as someone official from the territorial government. Kane, Mrs. Kane, Hawkins said. This is Marshal Donnelly and District Attorney Morrison. They need to speak with you. The marshal was a hard-faced man in his 40s with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything. Mr. Kane, I understand you had a run-in with Cole Johnson and his gang back in March. That is right. They ambushed me, shot me 3 times. I killed one of them in self-defense and barely made it here alive. Can you prove any of that? Ben looked at Natalie, who understood immediately. She went into the cabin and retrieved the tin cup where she had saved the bullets she extracted from Ben's body. She handed it to the marshal, who examined them carefully. These could be from any gun, Morrison said skeptically. True, Natalie said, but I also have the medical records I kept of his treatment. Detailed notes on the location and severity of each wound, how I treated them, the progress of his recovery. That should match what he is telling you. She went back inside and brought out her journal, the pages covered in her neat handwriting detailing everything she had done to save Ben's life. The marshal read through it carefully, his expression growing more interested. "This is thorough work, Mrs. Kane. You kept better records than most doctors. My father trained me. I documented everything like he taught me." Morrison read over the marshal's shoulder, then looked at Ben with new interest. "Johnson told us you attacked him and his men unprovoked, that he was defending himself. But this does not support that story." "Because it is a lie," Ben said flatly. "They ambushed me for my horse and money. I fought back. That is the truth." The marshal closed the journal and handed it back to Natalie. "There is more. Johnson has been linked to 3 robberies in the past 2 months, including a stage holdup last week where 2 people were killed. We finally have enough to bring him in, but he is dangerous and he knows we are coming." He looked at Ben directly. "The sheriff tells me you are handy with a gun. I could use a deputy to help bring Johnson and his gang in." "No," Natalie said immediately. "Absolutely not." "Natalie, you are not a lawman, Ben. You are a rancher, our rancher." She turned to the marshal. "He almost died once because of those men. I will not watch him ride out against them again." "Mrs. Kane, I understand your concern," the marshal said. "But Johnson has made it clear he is targeting your husband. This is not going to end until Johnson is either arrested or dead. Would not you rather have the law on your side when it happens?" She wanted to argue, to refuse, but deep down she knew he was right. Johnson would keep coming, keep threatening, until one way or another this was resolved. And if Ben was going to face him, better to do it with the law behind him than as a vigilante. "If he gets hurt," she said quietly, looking at the marshal with steel in her voice, "if he dies because you asked him to risk his life for your badge, I will hold you personally responsible." "Fair enough," the marshal said. Ben took her hand. "I will come back to you, I promise." "You had better," she whispered. The plan was set for the next morning. The marshal had tracked Johnson and his remaining men to an old line shack about 10 miles north of Sweetwater. With Ben, Sheriff Hawkins, and 2 other deputies, they would have enough men to surround the shack and force a surrender. That night, Natalie could not sleep. She lay beside Ben, memorizing the feel of him, the sound of his breathing, terrified that this might be the last time she held him. "Talk to me," she said softly. "Tell me something good, something to think about after you leave tomorrow." He rolled to face her, his hand coming up to stroke her hair. "I think about the future, about us. I think about building that practice you want, about raising a family here, about growing old together and watching our grandchildren play in the yard." He kissed her forehead gently. "That is what I fight for tomorrow. Not revenge, not justice. You, our future, that is worth any risk." "Come back to me," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, Ben, come back." "Always," he promised. He left before dawn, kissing her one last time before riding off with the marshal and the other lawmen. Natalie stood on the porch watching until they disappeared from view, then went inside and did the only thing she could think of. She prayed. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. She tried to keep busy, tending the chickens, working in the garden, mixing medicines she did not need just to have something to do with her hands. But her mind was miles away, with Ben, imagining every terrible possibility. It was late afternoon when she heard horses approaching. She ran outside, her heart in her throat, and nearly collapsed with relief when she saw Ben riding toward her, whole and unhurt. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped and caught her as she threw herself at him. "It is done," he said, holding her tight. "Johnson and his men are in custody. They will hang for the murders they committed. "It is over, Natalie. It is finally over." She pulled back just enough to look at him, needing to see his face to confirm he was really here and safe. "You are sure? It is really done, I am sure." He cupped her face in his hands. "We are safe now. We can finally just live without looking over our shoulders." The relief was so overwhelming she started to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Ben held her through it, murmuring soft words of comfort, his hand stroking her hair. When the tears finally subsided, she felt wrung out but lighter, as if a weight she had been carrying for months had finally lifted. That night, they made love with an intensity born of fear and relief, celebrating life and the future that stretched before them. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Natalie felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace. Finally, peace. The next year brought changes both gradual and sudden. They rebuilt the barn bigger and better than before, added more cattle to the herd, and watched their savings grow. True to his word, Ben pushed Natalie to pursue her medical practice, and by the following spring they had rented a small building in town where she could see patients properly. The people of Sweetwater embraced her work enthusiastically. She became known as the woman who could cure just about anything, who would ride out in the middle of the night to attend a difficult birth or sit with a dying man so he would not be alone. Ben supported her completely, taking over more of the ranch work so she could focus on healing. Their happiness took on a new dimension one evening in the fall when Natalie realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then told Ben over supper, watching his face transform from confusion to wonder to pure joy. "A baby," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We are having a baby. Yes." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Next spring, if I am calculating right." He pulled her into his arms and held her like she was made of glass, his face buried in her hair. "I am going to be a father," he said, and she heard the awe in his voice. "I am going to be someone's father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," she assured him. The pregnancy was harder than she expected. Morning sickness plagued her for months, and as her belly grew, the rides into town for her practice became increasingly difficult. Eventually, Ben insisted she stop working in the final months, and though she protested, she knew he was right. She spent her last trimester preparing the cabin for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and setting up a cradle Ben had lovingly crafted from smooth pine. Their son was born on a warm April evening in 1879, arriving after a long, difficult labor that left Natalie exhausted but euphoric. Ben had stayed with her through the whole thing, holding her hand, supporting her, and when the baby finally emerged crying lustily, he had tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Ben whispered, looking down at the tiny red face of his son. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him James Nathaniel Kane, after both their fathers. Little James had Ben's dark hair and Natalie's green eyes, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he had both his parents wrapped completely around his tiny fingers. Watching Ben with their son made Natalie fall in love with him all over again. He was so gentle, so patient, singing to James in a surprisingly good voice, walking the floor with him during colicky nights, changing diapers without complaint. The dangerous man she had dragged across her threshold 3 years ago had been fully replaced by this gentle father, though she knew the steel was still there underneath, ready to protect his family if needed. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Natalie returned to her practice part-time once James was old enough, bringing him along in a basket and letting the town women fuss over him while she worked. The ranch continued to prosper, and they were able to hire a young man named Tommy to help with the heavier work, giving Ben more time with his family. James was 2 years old, toddling around the cabin and getting into everything, when Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter, Caroline Grace Kane, was born in the winter of 1881. She had Ben's gray eyes and Natalie's blonde hair, and from the moment she could focus, she stared at her father with absolute adoration. "I am outnumbered," Ben said one evening, holding Caroline while James climbed on his back. "2 against 1. How did this happen?" "3 against 1, Natalie corrected, laughing at the sight of her strong husband being conquered by small children. "I am on their side." He grinned at her, that slow smile that still made her heart skip. "I would not have it any other way." The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a serious boy who loved helping his father with the cattle, while Caroline was bright and curious, following Natalie around and asking endless questions about the plants and medicines she worked with. They added more land to their holdings, built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family, and became pillars of the Sweetwater community. Natalie's practice flourished. She trained 2 young women as assistants, passing on her father's knowledge and her own hard-won experience. People came from towns as far as 50 miles away to see her, and she became known throughout the region as one of the finest healers in Texas. But no matter how busy they became, Natalie and Ben always made time for each other. They would sit on the porch in the evenings after the children were asleep, holding hands and talking about their day, about their dreams for the future, about nothing and everything. Sometimes they would ride out to a spot on their land where wildflowers grew in profusion, spread a blanket, and simply enjoy being together. "You ever think about that day?" Ben asked once as they lay under the stars. "When I crawled up to your cabin half dead?" "I think about it all the time," Natalie admitted. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I ever really had you, how my whole life hinged on that one moment when I decided to drag you inside instead of fetching the sheriff. I think about it too. About how you fought for me when you had no reason to." He turned his head to look at her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You saved my life that day, Natalie, but you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live, a home, a family, everything I never knew I wanted until I found you. You gave me just as much: purpose, partnership, love, children, a full life instead of just an existence." She squeezed his hand. "We saved each other, Ben." "Yeah," he agreed softly. "I guess we did." The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, by hard work and sweet rewards. James grew tall and strong, taking over more and more of the ranch work as Ben's hair began to gray at the temples. Caroline showed an aptitude for healing that delighted Natalie, and she began training her daughter in earnest, passing on the knowledge that had been passed to her. When James was 20, he married a girl from town named Sarah, a sweet-tempered young woman who fit into the family like she had always been there. They built a house on the southern edge of the property and began raising their own family. 2 years later, Caroline married a young doctor who had come to Sweetwater to open a practice, and together they expanded Natalie's work into a proper hospital. Ben and Natalie became grandparents 5 times over, and nothing delighted them more than having the grandchildren visit, filling the house with noise and laughter. They would sit on the porch and watch the children play, marveling at how life had unfolded. "You remember what you said to me?" Natalie asked one evening, both of them now in their 60s, their hair gray but their love as strong as ever. "That first time you were able to walk outside after I saved you. I said you were an angel," Ben replied. "And I was right. You said I was more than someone who knows how to stitch wounds. You said I was more than that, and I knew it." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saw me, Ben. Really saw me. Not just a lonely woman living on the edge of town, but someone with value and purpose." You believed in me before I fully believed in myself. And you saw me, he countered. Not an outlaw or a drifter or just another cowboy. You saw a man worth saving, worth fighting for. You gave me a chance when I had no right to expect one. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. The ranch was thriving. Their children were happy and successful. Their grandchildren were healthy and loved. It was more than either of them had ever dreamed possible on that bloody morning when fate had brought them together. I would do it all again, Natalie said softly. Every moment of fear, every hard day, every struggle, I would do it all again to end up right here with you. So would I, Ben agreed, pulling her closer. Every single moment. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other in the midst of violence and pain and transformed it into something beautiful. A half-dead man crawling to a cabin door. A woman brave enough to drag him inside and fight for his life. And from that desperate beginning, a love story that would endure for the rest of their days. Years later, when they were both very old, Ben would sometimes wake in the night and watch Natalie sleeping beside him, her face peaceful in the moonlight. He would think about how close he had come to dying in the dirt, how easily he could have never made it to that cabin door. And he would say a silent prayer of thanks to whatever force in the universe had given him the strength to crawl those last few yards, to collapse on her doorstep, instead of somewhere in the anonymous scrubland. Because those few yards had made all the difference. They had brought him to Natalie, and Natalie had brought him to life. Not just physical life, but real life. The kind filled with love and purpose and meaning. On a warm spring day in 1910, Benjamin Kane passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 80, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Natalie held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke, she knew he had lived a full and happy life. He had been loved, deeply and completely, and he had loved just as deeply in return. She lived another 3 years, continuing her work until the very end, teaching her grandchildren the healing arts and telling them stories about the wild days when Texas was still rough and untamed. She spoke often of the day she met their grandfather, of how love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, of how one choice to help a stranger could change the entire course of a life. When Natalie Durant Kane died in her sleep in 1913 at the age of 86, she was laid to rest beside Ben in the Sweetwater cemetery under a large oak tree. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates, but also an inscription their children had chosen. He crawled to her door, she fought for his life, and together they built a legacy of love. The ranch they had built passed to their children and grandchildren, remaining in the Kane family for generations. The hospital Caroline and her husband had founded continued to serve the community, a testament to Natalie's dedication to healing. And the story of how Ben and Natalie met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of courage, compassion, and the transformative power of love, because that is what their story had been in the end. A love story. One that began with blood and bullets and desperation, but transformed into something beautiful and lasting. A story of two people who found each other in the midst of chaos and chose to build something better together. In the wild, unforgiving landscape of 1877 Texas, where survival was never guaranteed and tomorrow was never promised, Benjamin Kane and Natalie Durant had found something rare and precious. They had found each other, and that had made all the difference. Their love story became a part of Sweetwater's history, referenced whenever people talked about the old days. The cabin where it all began, expanded and renovated over the years, still stood on the property, maintained by the family as a reminder of where it all started. Visitors to the ranch would often ask to see it, to stand in the place where Ben had collapsed, and Natalie had made the choice to save him. The town itself grew and changed over the decades, but some things remained constant. The hospital still bore the Durant name in honor of Natalie's work. A scholarship fund established by the family helped train new doctors and nurses, ensuring her legacy of healing continued. And every year on the anniversary of Ben and Natalie's wedding, the family would gather at the ranch for a celebration, toasting the couple who had started it all. The grandchildren who had known Ben and Natalie personally would tell the younger generations about them, about how Grandpa Ben could gentle the wildest horse with patience and a soft voice, about how Grandma Natalie could diagnose an illness with just a look and a few questions, about how they would sit on the porch every evening, holding hands like newlyweds even after 50 years of marriage. They loved each other something fierce, Caroline's daughter would say. Even at the end, when Grandpa was dying, all he wanted was Grandma by his side. And after he passed, she said she could still feel him with her, that love like theirs did not end just because one person left the physical world. The story of how they met never lost its power. Children would listen wide-eyed as they heard about the wounded cowboy crawling through the dirt, about the brave woman who dragged him inside and spent days fighting to save his life. They learned about the outlaws who had tried to destroy what Ben and Natalie were building, about the courage it took to face them down and build a life anyway. But more than the drama and danger, the story was about choice. Natalie had chosen to help when she could have turned away. Ben had chosen to stay and build a life instead of drifting on. Together, they had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, commitment over convenience. And those choices had rippled out through time, affecting not just their own lives but the lives of everyone who came after them. The land they had worked so hard to build up became some of the most productive ranch land in the region. The cattle operation expanded to include horses as well, and the Kane Ranch became known for breeding quality stock. The medical center that grew from Natalie's small practice became a regional hospital that saved countless lives. The family they created spread throughout Texas and beyond, carrying with them the values Ben and Natalie had instilled. But perhaps their greatest legacy was simpler than all of that. They had shown that love could triumph over even the harshest circumstances, that two people with nothing but determination and devotion could build something lasting and beautiful, that the choice to help a stranger, to fight for someone's life, to believe in the possibility of a better future, could change everything. On quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the Texas scrubland and the stars emerged in the endless sky, some swore they could still feel the presence of Ben and Natalie Kane on the land they had loved. Not ghosts exactly, but something more comforting. A sense of enduring love, of lives well lived, of a story that had ended but whose echoes would continue forever. The little cabin where it all began stood as a monument to that love. Preserved exactly as it had been, with the old quilt where Natalie had laid Ben when she dragged him inside, with her father's medical kit in its trunk, with the rocking chair where she had kept vigil through those desperate first days. Visitors would stand in that small space and try to imagine the scene. A man more dead than alive, a woman refusing to give up, the beginning of a love that would last a lifetime. And they would understand, in that quiet cabin with its simple furnishings and its powerful history, what Ben and Natalie had understood from the beginning. That love was not just a feeling but a choice. A choice to fight, to stay, to build, to believe in something bigger than yourself. a choice to see value in another person even when they were at their lowest, a choice to give someone a chance when they had no right to expect one. Benjamin Kane had crawled half dead to Natalie Durant's cabin door in the spring of 1877. She had dragged him inside and fought for his life with everything she had. And from that desperate beginning, they had built a love story for the ages. A story of courage and compassion, of strength and tenderness, of two people who found each other against all odds and refused to let go. Their story became a part of the land itself, woven into the soil and the sky and the wind that blew across the endless Texas plains. And as long as people told the story, as long as they remembered the cowboy who refused to die and the woman who refused to let him, Ben and Natalie Kane would live on, not just in memory, but in spirit. A testament to the enduring power of love, and to the truth that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we choose to help a stranger in desperate need. That was their legacy. That was their gift to the world, and it was more than enough.